Well, good evening, everyone. Let's call the Brattleboro Planning Commission to order for Monday, October 2nd. First order of business is to approve the minutes of September 11th. Anyone want to make a motion?
I will.
Anyone want to second that?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Can I,
Okay.
is there, since I wasn't there, is there a problem with me?
No.
Okay.
You were there.
This is August.
Oh. Did I give you August?
No, I'm looking, yeah, August is in this little packet, maybe September.
I think I gave you the wrong ones then, so I guess we can take this all back. Sorry.
Okay.
We'll put September on the next one. I
Okay.
apologize. So we'll rescind it all.
All righty. Any announcements?
Let's see. So our parking consultant, you might be wondering where that's been or what's going on with it. They worked pretty much all over the summer, and then he got called away to do some inspections down in Texas and Florida before parking garages could be opened up. So, but it's back on track. We're looking to schedule a steering committee meeting the week of the 19th. And then the second public meeting the following week. So I got that email today, so I'm gonna start trying to find a space for the second public meeting. Because that puts it around the 26th or something like that.
Yeah.
So I will keep you posted. Are there any nights, I know you weren't able to come to the first one, I think you may have been away or something, you were interested. Are there nights that are better than others? It would be an evening. Like a- Oh, it's my
No.
husband's too. We won't do it on that night.
It's the week after mine. Wow.
Generally Wednesdays are bad, unless
For
it's like
birthdays?
5 to 7.
Okay, yeah, it'll probably be later.
Yeah.
I mean, it's if you're, yeah, like for you all to come.
I think I was away.
I think you were, yeah, okay.
All righty.
Earlier in the evening was probably better for me because I have bedtimes later in the evening.
So should we start on the Brownfield program then?
Do we have any other announcements? I'm not sure that we do.
I think so.
Couple.
Okay, Sue?
So, we haven't talked about Brownfields in a while, and there's a couple things going on, so I thought I'd give you an update. And then we do have a new site that came in, so you have some information on that. One side of it is the actual application, and then the other side is kind of the criteria that we had agreed on. So let me just go through what we have available for hazardous sites. So right now, we currently have about 70,000. We have about another year. I think our contract year ends in 2018, so we have another full year with a possible extension if we needed it. So there's about 70,000 or 71,000 available for assessments. 56 Elm Street, that is, that's the livery building. It's the red kind of barn / garage building where they're going to do an outdoor amphitheater. Actually, we're finished with that phase of work. So I think we did have a savings of $816. I'll have to research that and put that back in. They have gone out to bid for the work. They, I think, are hiring an asbestos contractor to remove the asbestos. I think the site work is going to be pushed off. I heard today that not necessarily a great response, so maybe they'll go out again, maybe in the early, late winter or something like that. I guess I've heard it's not a good time to be putting projects out to bid. So I know they had initially hoped to be able to complete that kind of outdoors classroom amphitheater by the fall, but that's not likely to happen. The Reformer building, that's the new police station, and there was a ribbon cutting about 2 weeks ago, so that is our first success.
Did the police move yet?
They did,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, so I'd say success because there was no contamination found, but we spent a fair amount of money, as you can see. But did our due diligence.
We saved ourselves as taxpayers.
That's right.
Yes.
And you never know what turns up in the future. And by being in the state's liability program, any contaminants that might come up, like if you think about the PFOA that you read about in Bennington or in New Hampshire, that was an unclassified kind of contaminant. So they know a lot more about PFCs now through that. And if something like that was ever to turn up, we are covered. So 250 Birch Street is the
Covered in terms of the state action or covered in terms of liability?
a little bit of both. So if there are new classifications of contaminants that kind of come up, the state will then do the testing on it. So they can't make us pay for testing.
Oh,
Because
cool.
we have state liability. It's a limited liability, but that's one of the things is they won't be able to come in and say, we need you to test for something that we are now regulating. They will do that
They will
testing.
do. That's great.
Yeah. Now, the limited liability is if we do something to cause contamination, then we are back in the chain. So 250 Birch Street, that is the parcel down on the Whetstone Brook, the 12 acres that hoping to conserve. Right now, that is in the ABCA cap phase, which is an analysis of Brownfields cleanup alternatives. So basically, the engineers kind of look at the development plan for the site, and then they have to propose kind of 3 options for remediating the property. And this is property that has PAH contamination at various steps throughout the site. One positive thing that happened over the summer is the state's rules on the levels for PAH and arsenic in soils have changed for urban areas. So hopefully that means there is less, we still need to deal with the PAHs on the site and protect the human health and the environmental health. But we have some other options as to then rather just trucking it offsite as like really bad stuff. There's some other options that are at play. So we're expecting the ABCA cap mid-October in a draft form, so that moves forward. And at the same time, we had to authorize an update of the phase 1 assessment. So that's kind of the desktop study, interviews, walking the site, because portions of that report are only good for 6 months. So it's not uncommon that you'll see it in the reformer, we had to do a phase 1 update, and we do here as well, because you need a phase 1 to do your phase 2, but then a lot of times can lapse as that's going on, so that's what it's at. So it's making progress. And then the ST Oregon complex is that they needed some additional testing to do their corrective action plan, which was pretty much paving and doing some landscaping. And they had PAH, I think, arsenic, kind of the typical contaminations, and that has been completed. So
It's been remediated with the paving.
Yep.
What does it mean 3 monitoring bulbs were previously destroyed, like destroyed out?
If you leave,
I'm just wondering.
it could be a plow, it could be, so the monitoring wells kind of stick up a little bit, but
Oh, okay.
if something's
So-
run
so
over it,
something's run over
or sometimes you lose the cap and it gets filled with something.
thing happened.
Yeah.
No, and the well, I mean, it's more like, it's tiny. It's not like a rig, it's like, like a 3/4 inch pipe or something. They're not really,
Cool, thank you.
you're welcome.
And I think on that one, actually, I think there might be, I didn't bring that file with me. We might have to, oh, there it is. So one of the cleanup items that the property owner had to do was to install a sub-slab pressurization system. So one of the new things is soil vapor. So vapor intrusion coming into the buildings, off-gassing from the soils, making its way into the building. And then there's new soil gas thresholds. And so if the property owner agrees to keep the buildings in commercial use, she's not going to need to do that system. But that is going to require an amendment to the corrective action plan. So that might be something that, it's something we can fund. It might be something that comes to us. It would be pretty short addendum and it would be pretty inexpensive. But in order for her to get out of that requirement, it requires an corrective action plan addendum. So, 48 Elm Street, that is the old Tri-State Auto Building on the corner of Elm Street and Flat Street. It's owned by New England, it's the New England Youth Theater, the big brick building. Over the winter, there was kind of a partial roof collapse on the newer concrete portion of that building, and they are looking to demolish that section of the building. The other part is still very complicated. So in order to do that, they need some additional hazardous building material testing. So PCB, I think the asbestos is going to be all set, but they need to kind of delineate the extent of PCBs in the soils. And then they may or may not need what's called a self-implementing cleanup plan in order to handle that. So we're paying for some additional testing. So that work is just getting started as well. So those are the sites that we have for hazardous site assessment. Petroleum, there's really not been very much movement. And I spoke to my EPA project manager, and he said it's not uncommon in areas. So a lot of the gas stations that are in this area are owned by a corporation that is still viable. So it's hard to kind of crack into that because eligibility for a petroleum site is you go back 2 owners and you look at whether they're viable and liable, and any owner is going to be liable. And because we don't have like mom and pop kind of owned stores here, it's
But that's a good thing, you know, because if there's a responsible party,
right.
they're a responsible party.
Right. So that's been slow. And we'll see if anything shakes out with the Hinsdale Bridge project, and maybe we could use some funds, but we're not sure about that.
Has there been any recent progress on the 14 Spring Street?
No, they did the phase 1, and it's just kind of sad. I think it's been on and off the market. It'd be nice to.
I thought somebody was interested in putting a metal shop or something.
There's been interest along the way.
I can't remember what it was, a glass shop?
Something artisan like that.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, so the new site that we have a request for assistance with is 80 Flat Street. That is it's next to New England Youth Theater. It's the commercial
Is it
building,
the
the 1
church?
story. Yeah, CF Church building.
CF Church, yeah.
Mhm. Yep, and this site originally came into the Wyndham Regional Commission a couple of years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And the back part of it was assessed because it was going to be, there were people that were interested in using that rear portion closest to the brook. And so the idea is they were going to kind of condo it, so they was going to, so just the rear was assessed. And they did find some arsenic. Arsenic and PAH in the soil that exceeded the regulatory standards. There was no groundwater contamination. There was some soil gas issues with trichloroethene, 1,3-butadiene, and PCE, which is PCE is trichloroether. It's the one that's kind of associated with dry cleaning.
Yep.
It can also be associated with solvents and metal degreasing. Yeah. And then there was hazardous building materials, asbestos, lead paint, PCB paint, in the rear portion of the site. And so that phase 2 was done and nothing ever became of it. The people that were interested in it dropped out. And so the state wants the property owner to complete the testing and come up with a corrective action plan. So this is one of those scenarios where she's looking for assistance. The property is for sale, so I think she's got multiple interests in kind of getting it kind of worked out with the state. So she's trying to take advantage of the programs that are out there. And I think the
Is this to
state
finish
wants
up
it.
the rear portion that was
I
previously
think this-
identified, or do the whole
The
site?
whole site, the state wants the whole site characterized. So,
Which is
historical,
include the parking lot too.
yeah. Historical uses on the site were lumberyard, there was carriage repair, and then CF Church Manufacturing, which made wood toilet seats.
Really?
So,
It's a splinter industry.
I think their byline was find a seat in the house.
yeah.
Yep.
So,
Sorely missed they are.
so it is in the downtown, it's in the urban center, it's in an area, obviously, known as the movie theater. This is kind of like, I like to think of it as Auto Alley, actually. There was a lot of, across the street, the transportation center, and, you know, a bunch of those buildings had sort of early auto uses, a lot of carriage shops from, obviously here, the Arch, the livery building, that was carriage. So it's definitely in an area.
When you talked to the property owner, did you discuss the plans for the Whetstone Brook pathway?
Have not. I haven't talked with her by phone. We've communicated by email, but that's a nice idea, especially when it comes to the corrective action planning.
Yeah,
Because that would be part of what
advance
we're funding.
both plans together and alert the buyers to this opportunity.
And is there, does the zoning come into play in terms of like the setback from the brook or something, or is it?
It would, not, with it there, there would not be a requirement for demolition because it's a pre-existing
Right.
non-conforming.
Right, but depending on like, so if there was a new buyer, it would come in, if they're gonna change the use or?
Not changing the use if they were changing the footprint of the building. The rear part of it, I mean, this building did flood in Irene. The rear part of it, I think, you know, got good
That's where
damage.
Sam's.
That's where Sam's
had
storage
the-
was.
Right, and they're not there anymore, is it just empty?
No, Sam still is a tenant using it for storage of things that float, like kayaks and canoes, which is what was in there during
Yeah.
that.
And shoes.
And shoes,
Shoes.
which do not fall at the time, once they're full of water.
So did you say that the auto use in the area suggests that we could use the possibly the petroleum funds?
You know, I was talking, I was at the Wyndham Regional Commission today, and their projects, their Brownfields project leader actually did think that she may have submitted it under petroleum. I'd like to try to, but I'm not sure. I think that there is enough of a mix of contamination that it might be hard for me to get it under.
Can we ever split how we're using the site, so
No.
we're allowed to
You,
split?
you used to be able to do that, but no, they want to go with them, yeah, with what is the majority of the contamination. And so I think with the PAH arsenic, the soil gas stuff could be a little bit more petroleum related, but.
How does that work when we get to the end of the grant period? If we haven't used the petroleum funds, can they be reallocated for hazardous, or do they
No.
go back?
No, they would take it back, or we'll get extension, or they'll take some of it back, some sort of combination. Yeah, I'm sorry, yours aren't very visible. If anybody wants to see a color copy of the funds,
I think you've,
I try not to
I
go.
was just gonna say. it's
you've
the
reached
same.
the downside of color on copies.
Yeah, that was it.
Are there any rules or requirements about the corrective action plan on that property based on sort of the flooding issues that that area's had? So if they want to cap, if they want to demolish the building, cap the whole thing, make it a non-permeable
No.
parking lot, that's.
Well, they might have zoning issues with that. Probably they would not have regulatory. It's a bit of a challenge because obviously we would prefer porous surfaces and for the
I'd rather have a
protection of-
capped, contaminated site.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, so it is a trade-off. Sometimes it's hard to do low-impact development and that kind of thing on brownfield sites. Sometimes, you know, you can put a marker, like a geotextile fabric down and then bring in clean soil on top of it, but, you know, you can't get infiltration that way either because of the barrier. So one of the things when you're doing corrective action planning, they do want you to look at and you need to address in your report kind of green remediation strategies. But it can be a bit of a challenge. So I'd like to ask if you guys think that's an acceptable site, if you could.
I move that we nominate or add this site to our Brownfields program.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous, so.
Excellent. And then I have public outreach down here on the agenda. I'm working with Wyndham Regional Commission. We're trying to put together, we call it Bagels and Brownfields. I did it probably last 9 years ago.
9 years ago.
Yeah, I know. I was pregnant at the time, so. And it's geared towards kind of development professionals, attorneys, realtors, commercial bankers. We try to get somebody to come from the state, talk about liability and the state's programs, and we have in the past had an attorney come and speak in environmental law. So we're looking to do that in November. So we'll keep you posted on all of that. You'd be welcome to come as well. But yeah, reaching out to development professionals. It's funny, sometimes you mention it with a banker and they're like, what? Okay.
Wrong answer.
Yeah, and it's important for bankers too, because if somebody goes belly up on their mortgage, then they hold the property and they're in the chain.
Well, it's important for bankers because it's free money.
Well, they also want to know.
Is that the
what-
same as free golf?
So we're working on that.
Fun. Okay, but can you do bagels, Bloody Marys, and Brownfields?
I don't know, it's a federal thing.
Could be a hazardous
Sounds
spill.
Oh, I forgot to I wanted to tell you on 250 Bird Street, we're still trying to investigate how much gravel is on the property. And so right now there's a gravel feasibility study going on to figure out if recovering gravel from the site should be, is one of the cleanup options. So, you know, we talked about there's some pH at certain depths. Well, if there's a lot of gravel there, then does it make sense to kind of separate out the gravel and the finer material?
And can you remind me who owns the site now?
250 Bird,
Sossamon.
Sir Sossamon.
It's owned by Susan. Okay, and there's still conversations about conservation easement?
Yeah, we're doing the Brownfields work on behalf of the Vermont River Conservancy.
So the land use section of the master plan, I looked over it briefly and I just wondered, these changes mostly reflect the fact that the land use plan and the zoning ordinance has been changed? That would-
Yes.
So you're kind of, rather than documenting the need for the changes you've moved on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so for this chapter, I would say probably that you see most of the change in the policies and actions, and also some slimming down of the discussion of flood. And we also, on page, oh, there's no page numbers, oh, sorry, 126, there's a long discussion of revising the PUD regulations, which was done. So yeah, so it was more here of taking things out rather than documenting that they were done. But if you...
Well, you're taking them out because they were.
Because they've been done, yeah.
Right.
Right.
So don't know if we want to talk about the policies and actions, or if you want to, if we've had a chance to read it, and then the existing land use really, it hasn't changed in the last
Is
5
there,
years.
this is kind of, so the things that we're taking out, do they
Mhm.
need to, do some of them need to be integrated in the chapter, like as
we
points
did
of
this?
information, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Is there a section that says we redid the zoning and the goals of that were X, Y, and Z?
No.
That might address Kathy's
Yeah.
question.
This sentence is, you're probably going back to edit this, but analyze which public and private could benefit from protection and education of property owners about their own mitigation. What?
It could have been my transcript. So actually, you know what? You'll see it again. I wonder if I wrote it better the next time around. So we can actually just take it out.
You always get a second
It came
chance.
from our, let's see, study the cost and feasibility for the application of temporary measures for flood protection, including such devices as stop logs and inflatable dams. Analyze the public and private properties that could benefit from such protection. Educate private property owners about their mitigation options. Yeah. I was typing funny. That came out of the Whetstone charrette,
Right.
actually. They, if you recall, they looked at some temporary mess, you know, kind of along the lines of floodgates. These are kind of more streetscape stuff that could go up and.
Is the Whetstone charrette information in here? As a,
Not-
as a plan?
Oh, right.
As a future plan, maybe we want to do that.
Yeah, I liked the addition of creating trails along the Whetstone Brook, but nice to,
Yeah.
it would be nice to call it out more deliberately.
And is the talk of the downtown master plan in here?
It's still in.
It's still in there.
That I saw, yeah.
Yep.
So, one place, Kate, on your comment, page 124.
Yeah.
We had that increased public access to the waterfront. We could bring maybe some of the Whetstone stuff in there, and that cat trail stuff too.
Yeah, it'd be nice to tie back to that, the EPA charrette plan and
Yeah.
the Whetstone
Give it-
Trail.
To give it its due as a bona fide plan. Does anyone else have any other comments on the land use section?
I'm trying to, now, speaking of that, the Sea of Church property, I can't remember, was that even in the charrette
Yes,
area?
It was,
yes.
definitely.
It showed,
What did we think?
It was turning it into a Shangri-La.
Is that
yeah,
where the beautiful riverfront dining is going to be?
Yes,
exactly.
with like a bridge kind of.
yes. It showed a bridge across
That's the
across
Shangri-La
brook,
part.
and then
Yeah.
an outdoor cafe area in back,
Okay.
Yeah,
and
a trail going by.
a trail going by, and then
Having people see.
whether
Need
or
to find the
not,
right buyer now.
right, then whether or not the parking lot, you know, whether there could be infill in the parking lot on the sidewalk edge, that was somewhat raised so that it was above base flood elevation. I guess it was the other. was that-
No, that was the other one.
was it further down?
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Cool.
There were some policies that were added, like if we did go for another Brownfields grant. So we were silent in the whole town plan. So 12.1.3, that whole thing changed from simplifying the land use regulations. I guess that is kind of totally new. concept there and thought what's consistent with the state planning goals. And so the big one is direct development to existing developed areas. So that's maintaining the zoning districts, because we think we did that the last time around. That gets into brownfields redevelopment, because if we do write an EPA grant for more funding, they are looking for specific discussion of that in advance. So those two are in there. There might be other actions that
Great.
I can think of, but maybe the Whetstone shred works there too. And then the other one, I felt like we hit the commercial, we hit waterfront, we hit flood hazards, but we really didn't talk about the residential neighborhoods. So that was kind of another missing piece. So 12.7 was a new policy to maintain and enhance the quality of life in the residential neighborhoods. And this gets into supporting community efforts. And then the other one I put in was using a neighborhood planning process to engage local communities to define neighborhood area specific values and policies. We've kind of talked about that on and off in the air. There's some work going on with Green Street Promise, and there's FEET. There's West Brattleboro Association. So that kind of covers maybe work that other groups are doing there.
Great.
So, and then under the attractive appearance 12.4, the commercial developments, we've talked a lot about, and we've been frustrated a bit about the amount of large parking lot paving that goes on.
Mhm.
So I put something in there that would get at a land use change. I tried to think about what are the land use changes that we were considering, and most of them are pretty minor, but this could be a big one.
So right now, we do not require permits for those things?
No, so a couple of years ago, Hannaford's redid their parking lot, and, it could have been an opportunity to improve stormwater management, put in some landscaping, but there was no permit required, and there's been others around town too.
So the difficult point there is the distinction between maintenance and
No.
new construction, basically. So redoing blacktop, many people regard as just doing maintenance.
God-given, right?
Well, there is that aspect of it too. The smell of asphalt in the morning.
Uniforms. I know.
So restriping, that would be repainting.
Yes.
They would need to.
I could see where.
I think it's the
someone would
repaving and the
push back on
restriping.
that.
Like,
Yeah.
restriping, if it's commercial anyway, and they're gonna do something different, like a new restriping, that would require a permit anyway, because it can change the circulation.
Right, if they're just gonna repaint over the old lines, then,
That would be
yeah,
maintenance.
that's maintenance.
Yeah, because,
But in combination with repaving, then that's.
yeah, because painting of the old lines, they probably have to do that in some of those lots every spring.
Yeah.
Well, they
Scraped up.
would do it at the dump. I mean, it's very rare that they, around here, that people do it anyway.
Okay, anything else on land use? Moving on to flood.
So flood resilience is a new requirement of town plans. And we had covered a lot in this.
Definitely.
So I thought we were in pretty good shape. I have written a new section, whether or not we incorporate it into, the land use section, or how it ends up playing, we need to think a little bit about. But basically what we're required by statute is to take a look at the floodplain and what's called the river corridor, and that the state has mapped that. And the river corridor is basically the area that it would take, that a river stream might meander, because in that meander belt is where you might get erosion, the fluvial erosion. So whereas the floodplain that we typically think of is the inundation flooding, where the water comes in and rises up, and if you're in the Midwest, it stays there for weeks, and then it goes down. Ours is more of that fluvial erosion, like might take out stuff in its path. The river corridor, the state really encourages towns to adopt their river corridor maps and to implement some regulations. They want no development in the river corridor. And in our early analysis of the maps, we didn't feel, and we're not the only town, that felt that it met the needs of a kind of urban center, where historic development takes place on the, along the brooks. Just pulling up out of those areas could have, some drastic effects on the area economy. So, and that was, part of that was the impetus for the Western Charette. So, this has been historically developed for a long time. How can we do it better without, there's a lot of infrastructure there. So the section takes a look at the flood risks that we face. We also have ice dams. We have street flooding from, kind of flash flooding from heavy storm events, which we're seeing more and more. And so we're specific about what's at risk in this chapter. And then we need to do flood resiliency planning. So what are the measures that the town is taking into place? How are we trying to become more resilient? So for us, that's the second part of this chapter. It's continued participation in the National Flood Insurance Program. We talk about the river corridor and how it might not be a good fit for Brattleboro, but we'll take a look at it. It's about land conservation. We talk about there, partnering. Let's see, like with the state or with housing organizations. So obviously working to get Melrose Place and to get people in Terrace, right? Not the 90s show. To get Melrose Terrace relocated and then to help them get the complex demolished.
So I have a question on policy X.4.4.
Okay.
So, excuse me, so it says examine adopting river corridor rules excluding the densely developed historic town center and adjacent neighborhoods. So this is just clarification. So that's what you're describing with, with the rules the state sort of put out there that were good for maybe like most of Vermont, but not necessarily already very established developed areas like downtown Brattleboro, where if you pull back from the river so far, there's like no nature to go back to. But river corridor is in capitals. Is there a specific thing there that refers to?
It's, yeah, and it doesn't show very well on this black and white map.
Oh,
But,
okay. So
it's basically, the river corridor is that light kind of, it follows the brooks and it's the lighter shade. Like you can see it along the Whetstone here. You can see it along the Crosby.
Does that correspond with the flood lines, like the 100-year flood line? 10-year
Roughly
flood line?
500-year flood
Roughly
plain.
500-year flood
Right.
line.
Which,
Irene was more 500-year flood than
it's difficult. Part of the problem with this is the whole idea of hundreds of years and the usefulness of describing flood events when climate change is making
Right.
those events more commonplace. So statistically, we're going to have to replace the labeling. So that's number one problem. Number two, what we understand to be the 500-year floodplain is obviously a larger area than that's impacted by 100-year. And so it's the fullest extent of the course of the river over roughly that time frame also is the way to think about it. And so, and to answer your question about capitalization, the state does have a so-called river corridor rule and a river corridor layer in their mapping, and so they can enforce or review to that standard for Act 250 permitting processes. I don't think it's correct grammatically to capitalize it in this instance, actually. But maybe we should look at that. I'm not sure what its formal title is. I think it may be something as basic as river corridor. And then the other thing is, as a commission, you have the choice, I guess,
not necessarily just now, but to contemplate whether we would, as a town, as a community, recommend, or as a commission, that you would recommend to the select board some partial or complete adoption of the river corridor rule. And if you want to do that, either as part of the town plan rewrite process or subsequent to it, that's okay, I guess. I mean, what I'd say is we need to bring you more background information about how the rule is constructed and applied. The piece that you now know is that in the Act 250 permit process, DEC has party, the Department of Environmental Conservation River Management Program has party status before Act 250, in Act 250 proceedings, so it comes up there. One way of thinking about that is that large-scale projects on further out of town, so there are not very many Act 250 permit-covered developments downtown because of its age and their size. But once you get some distance out of town, like up Putney Road and out on Route 9, then you do. And so it is in play already for large segments of both the Whetstone and to some extent the Crosby Brook to the north. The river corridor for the Connecticut is pretty straightforward for a whole lots of topographical reasons to some extent.
They didn't map it yet.
And they haven't, I don't think they've mapped it. So, I mean, because it's not a it's not a variable. It's a controlled water body, so its variability is sort of established. So in other words, if you want to take a kind of a detour in the next month or so and actually look at whether you want to resolve that question or just leave it hanging, that the work of the Planning Commission in the subsequent 8 years will be to look at the river corridor rule, so-called, and see whether it makes sense to implement it in Brattleboro. It's up to you as a commission. I mean, you could knock it on the head and say, we thought about it, we don't want to do it, or you could say, we definitely want to look at it some more, or...
Yeah, I think Brian in our office has looked at it a bit. We do have the riparian buffers in our land use regulations,
Right.
and that is at a minimum, like, especially in the further reaches of town, it's 50.
It's 50.
50 feet from top of bank, 100 feet for an undeveloped property. So we think those areas kind of match up for sure. I think it's definitely like when you get below the Creamery Bridge, that's where you maybe kind of, when you get below Chelsea Royal in that area, that's where we might not necessarily be, we could do some mapping and
Yeah,
figure out where
yeah.
our stream
Where there's-
setbacks are. And
Where there's gaps, if you like. So if you could imagine layers of maps, we could show what pieces of land are impacted by the river corridor layer, what areas of land are covered by our 50 and 100 foot riparian buffer layer, and then basically figure out what the difference is. And obviously everything
That'd be a
down.
useful exercise, maybe just to.
Would it be a useful exercise? Is that the question?
Yeah, I mean, from your perspective, or
At
does
some
it
point.
make more sense to sort of handle one property at a time?
What I'd say there is that would answer the question of how much land is potentially impacted by any proposed rule change, but it doesn't address other features of the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Template language of the river corridor rule from the state, which part of the problem with the river corridor rule as it currently exists is that it lacks some basic elements of due process, so there is no mechanism to appeal it. And the science involved in actually determining it is somewhat of a black box. And so if you're a landowner and you question the validity of the designation, unlike FEMA, which still might not be very satisfying, but there is a mechanism. There's letters of map amendment, there's letters of map revision, there is a process that you can go through. You can call up an engineering firm and say, how much would it cost for you to prepare a letter of map amendment? And it'll be absurdly high, but it's kind of a known thing. So if you're really emphatic and insistent, or if it was worth it to you for the sake of your project, you might contemplate it. Or even as a community, we might contemplate it. But there is no equivalent process of review
and there's no panel that would, basically sign off on an amended river corridor map for a community. And so part of it is to do with the area of land that's impacted, and part of it's to do with the quality of the rulemaking in the first place. So we can't verify the quality of the mapping, and it lacks a review process.
All right, well, but regardless, the language the way it is now is written in a way where it's like
Yeah, we can look at it.
you can look at it, but then
Right.
there's various ways of looking
Sure.
at it, right? Depending on
Right, and depends on how much attention you want to give it. I mean,
Yeah. Okay. Is this would be a separate chapter?
Maybe.
I mean,
that's
because I'm thinking.
another question that we can resolve here, or, yeah. And I think
Right, like
tonight's
we have
good.
the natural resources chapter, and there's the flood hazards piece of that,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
and riparian corridors, and so,
Yep,
Yeah, it could, I thought it could fit into natural resources, it can fit into land use.
or it could be as an appendix. I mean, it's kind of clunky, but one approach that we can take with this rewrite is basically acknowledge that there are a set of things that we've been required to respond to since the original town plan was approved in 2013. And to maintain conformance with Chapter 117 state statute, we need to do these things, and you'll find them in the back. Yeah, it's kind of,
it's not very elegant.
Yeah.
it's not very elegant, but
For an award-winning town plan.
I think we've done it. I think we've won our award.
We wouldn't resubmit.
Yeah, and I think we're resubmitting now. But so that's, that's a sort of a quick and dirty version. So it's a genuine question for you as a group, and it's a question for us as staff as well. It's like, the more we tinker with this and the more we pull it down so that we maintain those things that actually are really important and nice about the plan now, which is it speaks with one, it reads with one voice, it's got a very consistent format, it's nicely formatted and produced. If we want to maintain all those standards for any new language that gets folded into existing chapters, it's more time consuming than just saying something like this, which is, okay, so since it was adopted in 2015, you guys have come up with this fabulous idea called flood resiliency, see Appendix 2.
I like the idea of having it be incorporated into the land use section, because the land use section has most of the guts of what the state requires and what is in force. And then there might be sections that you might want to repeat or coordinate with the natural resource section. But the bulk of it to be in land use purposes. And regulatory in scope.
Yeah, it would be nice if it was that clean. It's that.
Well, I like to think of it.
I know, but that, just because you're somewhere from, yeah.
Would you separate out would we stick all the goals, so be it land use and these together, all under land use so all the
Yes,
goals
but
are
then-
found under
but then
land use,
we-
but there can be a header for flood resiliency.
Definitely a header for flood resiliency, and then repeat some of those goals in the natural resource part that are appropriate to natural resource.
I like the idea of it being in the appendix as a flood resilience action plan, and then it can be referred to both in the land use and the natural resources sections. For further on flood mitigation, see the action plan.
Do we really mean to have it as an action plan? Is that what it's?
It is kind of an action plan.
Does it have
A
to-
lot of it comes out of a hazard mitigation plan, which.
I know, this is the other.
It is kind
This is
of-
the other, because we're bureaucrats and we're deep into this, this is just another cutting and pasting exercise because we've already done it. It's just called the hazard mitigation plan. So it's just sort of this tedious thing of,
Well, because in truth, the plan included all these flood things, and now the state has made it a requirement.
Yeah, with some extras that we
So
didn't
we're
have,
kind of
so-
ahead of the game, but now we have to massage it into the mix.
And did we go over, sorry, did we go over the natural resources chapter yet?
We did.
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
You may have missed that part, so if you have any comments, you can send them. Or you can bring them up.
No, I'm just wondering how,
Are you concerned
To
about the
integrate
repetition part or the integration
Huh?
part? Are you, okay.
We might want to think about this some more
Yeah, that's okay.
if for our next meeting, now that we have something specific to think about.
One of the things that might
I mean,
help.
the language in here is very general, you know, it sort of explains flood hazards, it sort of explains, you know, repairing corridors. So maybe it does make sense, since this is more kind of like a deeper dive in terms of, you know, that it would go into the land use as a section.
The other thing that we can do, I think I probably have a preference to have it in land use over
Technology resources, yeah.
And then just picking up on Jessica's point, we already have the implementation chapter in back. And so we could probably use some clever coding thing to indicate which goals are flood resilience goals or something like that. No?
That would be awesome.
Somebody can, not you. Somebody.
I'm not sure it's me, but I did not design this layout. This is a very nice layout. I wish I had the skills.
Yeah, so yeah, assuming that we could find the skills, yeah, we could do something like that. And so then, you know, if you're just going to go to the implementation chapter, which is already, you know, formatted as an appendix, and your one interest was flood resilience,
Yeah.
then it should be pretty easy to figure them out.
Oh, yeah, it could,
Yeah, you can
it
just
could,
do
you
it in
could pull
color
them
or-
out
yeah,
actually
yeah, you can just
separately. Like
use
even if
that.
it sat, whether it was an appendix or it sat in the natural resources.
Yes.
If it sat in the natural resources, you could definitely pull them out and say.
Right.
Resilience.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, the other thing to do is, if we're going to have a flood resilience discussion in land use, then we just make sure that we've culled everything to do with that out of natural resources and stuff and stick it in land use. All right? And just make it really clear when you're reading natural resources that flood resilience is a
I think the flood
discussion.
hazard could definitely come out. I would leave
Yeah.
riparian, but
Yeah.
the flood hazard could come out of
Right.
natural resource.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
it
and I
is
think the
different.
riparian stuff is a different,
There's
is
more
a
of an
different,
ecological.
there's
like-
more of an ecological approach to it. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So do you want
pretty good
to,
with
do you want us to mess around with that for next time?
That'd be great.
Okay.
So
That'd be great.
we're not decided on how it's going to be.
What am I supposed to do now? Okay. No.
So messing around with adding it to the land use chapter, figure out what needs to come out of natural resources, and then like how to update that implementation matrix.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that,
That's
which we've officially now called messing around.
All right.
Okay,
All right.
thanks, Lily.
So our last item is this arch chapter.
Is the what?
Yes.
And we're not doing the energy.
We can, I want to discuss energy a little bit, actually, before we go.
So arts chapter outline, it got as far as outline because this, just a lot of other work on the table and didn't get around to rewriting the chapter. But Jess and I did meet and tossed around some ideas of what a new chapter would look like. If you recall, that's a chapter where a lot of what is discussed in the chapter kind of got worked out through a grant and it's not necessarily applicable anymore. So.
You mean in the arts and cultural resources?
Yeah.
So much like the land use, you have to update it
Mhm.
because a lot of it's been accomplished.
Yeah, and it
And-
might be a different direction to go
Right.
because of what was accomplished. So, you know, there is some stuff that's in the current chapter that could stay, it's talking about the benefits. There were, Jessica shared some interesting materials about what retirees are looking for in communities. So, you know, Vermont is aging. I thought that seemed pretty applicable if they're looking to be engaged. And and then health outcomes as well. So we can talk a little bit about that as to kind of supporting the needs for planning for the arts. And then public art, can't remember what regulatory changes was.
Being able to say this is art, it's not a sign, or this is art, it's not a banner, or being able to
That's right.
have some sort of way to say this is art and it's not this, so that those regulatory things don't apply, because it's different.
We had talked about being explicit if you're doing a downtown master plan or another sort of master plan, that we kind of give consideration to arts and as ways to increase public art. And then kind of the artistic and cultural identity. I don't want to talk over if you want to talk to some of this.
Were we talking about identifying these things, or?
Not as straight up, but I guess some of the key venues and events and the importance of those to the community, but not necessarily an inventory.
Is there, in terms of culture identity, is there is there any Native American perspective on our plan?
There is not, and it's actually interesting that you speak to that. Maybe that needs to be added into the historical resources, because I don't know if you remember, Liz, you might remember, there was a gentleman that came when we were doing the LUR.
There's an
Actually, you
article
might,
in the
Kathy.
Reformer about him just a
Yeah.
couple weeks
Yeah,
ago.
you
spoke
were-
today.
And there are
Yeah.
more cultural, things that have been found in town that,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, I think we had said
somewhere.
that would be a more appropriate place than the land use regulations at the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's historic and scenic or arts and cultural. Like if, like there, you can decide which frame, right? You wanna.
It could turn up in both. I mean,
Yeah.
or it certainly should be, I
It's
think it probably should be
historical.
referenced in both.
It could be,
Yeah.
And discussed maybe more, and,
Mhm.
depending on which aspect, but, yeah, it's rich. So we can reach out to him.
Yeah.
And you think we, in the time since the plan was adopted, changed, we now recognize Indigenous Peoples' Day instead of Columbus Day, and so I think
Yeah.
there are some things that we can point to that show an increasing interest and awareness in the pre-white settlement patterns and interaction with the physical environment, how that influences what we're doing now.
Is there any tie back, pulling off of that thread, is there an even more general tie back between the arts and cultural identity in the town that could be made in terms of diversity as well?
We talked about that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting
I don't know.
strand as well.
It seems like, the Native American aspect is a good specific for, a general goal for the town of wanting to promote diversity through the arts.
Perhaps getting a little bit of numbers on the diversity of the school system.
Okay.
Did I just hear a baby?
No.
No.
Oh, it's you. I was like, over here. You look cell phone monitor. Yeah, that might fit under artistic and cultural identity, right? Sort of
Yeah, I mean, I should say, probably at the time that we framed the arts and culture chapter the last time around, we didn't really mean culture in terms of anthropology so much as, public radio culture, as in,
Culture.
I know, but
Yeah, right. Thank you very much.
It's not an obviously defined term, you know what I mean?
No. Exactly.
So if you're gonna talk about the culture, I think it has to be quite expansive in terms of,
Mhm. Right, and the demographic makeup of the community is something that we discuss, I think, in an appendix, actually.
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, we might talk about it up front as one of its aspects.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Let's see, and then under municipal support for the arts, to kind of talking about what the town, what the municipality currently does, and then things that we could consider doing. So the percent for art is, correct me if I get this wrong, but when the town's undertaking a project, a certain percentage of the budget would go to art. So it could be public art installation, something like that. And that could be, even like a paving project, right? It could be whatever. Providing resources here at the library, 'cause,
That would be in the form of some sort of ordinance.
I mean,
That the town
the
would
percent
pass.
for art.
Yeah.
I think it, yeah.
Yeah, the select board would adopt it as a policy, and so,
Doesn't it become a budget question, like is that a town meeting question?
well, the select board has a responsibility for formulating the budget
Oh,
and
yeah.
presenting it to town meeting. So if town meeting didn't like it, town meeting could advise the select board that they didn't like the global number for the budget and they would like it adjusted exactly 1% down,
Or
And then the select-
5% up.
or 5% up, and then the select
Oh,
board.
that's gonna happen.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And then the select board gets to change the number, but remember, town meeting doesn't get
Right,
to say,
right.
doesn't get to say about anything but the line items. Although, town meeting spends most of the day discussing the line items, recognizing that in the end, it's the select board that identifies the line item amounts. And it's the town meeting that determines the global amount.
Dare to dream.
That, totally fine with it. I find it sort of nightmarish, but I do see it sort of fitting in, town meeting gets into sort of a dreamscape for me.
Yes.
It's-
Yeah,
yeah. One big dream all Saturday long.
So then there'd be encouraging partnerships and supporting access to municipal space, parks, public spaces, to support artists and organizations that present art. Artists certainly make use of our space, but to some extent, but it's not necessarily accessible to them, whether it's cost or lack of stairs or.
So the one thing is, I think in the existing town plan, we look at the library as under municipal services.
We do,
And we don't really think of the library as a cultural resource
right.
and as a,
I think there might be a mention, no, but it's true.
Right.
It's,
And it's a place actually that houses
Right.
an astounding amount of art. So maybe we move some stuff about the library into this chapter, or at the risk of duplication, make a little bit more of a deal about the role of the library as a cultural institution of some note.
yeah, I think
I like
we
that
did
idea.
definitely talk about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, okay.
It's funny because I almost feel like recreation and parks, cemeteries could be,
Well, cemeteries, I think, is a Halloween contribution, which is also cultural in a way.
No,
but,
I mean, from like an historical and artistic perspective, like there's there's like the utility of the cemetery and like, right? But there's also like,
You gotta park them somewhere, it's true. Yeah.
I don't know, whatever, I'm just throwing it out.
This is where I said that they're trying to get in.
Thank you. I was just waiting for that. Just waiting.
Sorry.
No, I just have a different relationship with cemeteries. I've spent so much time like
appreciate
walking
that.
through ceremonies having ceremonies in cemeteries, and even, has ever been
Witches
Up
and
in
what's the male
Charleston?
form of the witch again?
a warlock.
Warlock. Okay.
In
So
Charleston, they do this great historic tour in the
Yes.
cemetery where
Yes.
they have people who are basically impersonating their own great grandparents. Right? Telling
That's
historic
fun. Okay.
stories, which I was
Charleston,
always like,
Vermont?
no, South Carolina.
Oh.
no, wait, what did I say?
West Virginia?
Charlestown, New Hampshire.
Charlestown, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Oh,
Really?
Yes, I do
Yes.
actually.
Is that
At port number 4?
Number 4?
No, it's not. It was when I went several years ago. I don't know if they still do it or do it every year.
Oh,
But
Your
It's
friend
part
started
of, like,
that on
the
the
his-
Walpole thing.
It's like the
I
historical
think they started
society
in
or
Walpole
something
recently.
does it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. It's
Yeah.
great. It's like an outdoor theater event in the cemetery.
Did they
This
do
is
it
one of my
in
pet
Walpole?
projects I wanted to figure out how to do and just never
Okay.
got there. My next life.
I know you probably said this, but Brattleboro Historical Society has a really nice Facebook presence.
Yes.
Speaking
Yes.
of culture.
Yeah,
But
they
I
do.
think that you should rethink doing this in your next life.
This life,
You
yeah.
should do this.
I'll fit
Do
it
it
in.
in this life.
Do you
My
believe in the
tourism
afterlife? Is that what you're trying to
company,
say?
my outdoor theater company. Whatever, why I keep putting these on?
I think that's a great idea. That's fun.
Yep, cool.
Anyway, so I'm just explaining how my brain gets the cemetery into the cultural resource thing because I feel like
There's art in the cemetery.
right, there's
Yes.
art and there's a way you interpret your local history
Yes.
in it. So, whatever, it's a stretch, but
No, it's a significant, it's a significant commitment.
Reverence for our
And, you know,
ancestors.
in terms of space, and it's a repository for our shared history and knowledge, so.
But I think I would put it under the historical rather than, I mean, I see.
If you took
what
it
you're
out of
saying.
municipal.
But if I took it out of municipal, I think I'd put it in historical. But,
Yeah.
But I see,
I
I mean, the whole
think
thing kind of,
Right.
you know.
Has anyone put together any written material about who's in the cemetery?
the historic, you mean in Brattleboro?
Yeah.
Oh my God, the Historical Society has all kinds of information.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but there's no like comprehensive
Who's who?
who's who, you know, they kind of know, those Historical Society people, when you start talking to them about
Yeah,
the
it all
cemeteries,
comes
they're
out.
like, well, Madame Cherie is buried over here.
Yeah.
Over here, and so, you know,
Yeah.
and here's the, you know, roster of everyone.
Right.
Nobody important is in the mausoleum though, or well, nobody, sorry, I shouldn't say nobody important, that was rude of me. Nobody of historical is significant to therefore get funding to fix it, I know that.
According to the federal government,
Yeah.
nobody important.
And that's part of the trick or challenge, right, is identifying who's there and then telling their story. And
Yeah.
then it becomes a question of
Oh,
whether
what-
they're
right.
an historic,
Yeah.
important historic figure or not.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of
Yeah.
interesting stories that faded with our history that if we.
Oh, sure.
Well, there's
dug them
another
up-
I think of national
Funky
significance.
Vermont thing where you can bury people in the backyard. You don't need to put them in a cemetery, so we've probably lost a lot because we've forgotten where everyone's, you know, like there's the cat and then grandma or, you know, all that kind of stuff in the
Anyway,
backyard.
sorry, total segue. Let's just go.
You can share.
Vermont's one of the few states where you can do it yourself.
Both tourism and theater. So.
All right.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
everyone.
So were you thinking of
let's-
Savannah when, I was thinking of Savannah, Georgia as well.
Charlestown, sorry.
Okay,
Good
so
stories.
what do you want to tell us about the energy portion, Rob?
Oh, okay, so, I was hoping by now that let me back it up. So there was a lot of work done in the state and regional and local energy planning world in the legislature last year. And flowing on from that has been significant changes for municipalities in the town planning world, among other things. So one of the issues that came to the fore in the last legislative session was in fact the impact of large, what some people refer to as industrial scale renewable energy facilities. Usually people are referring to large wind turbines when they're describing them that way. And so there was some pushback, particularly from the Northeast Kingdom and from communities sort of at the bottom of Lake Champlain, like in Addison County, such as New Haven. There was, and Rutland town, where there was significant pushback against the visual impact primarily, and potential health impacts of large-scale turbine installations. And so in response to that, the state legislature came up with a legislative response that called on communities to more carefully take into account how they were planning for energy production and consumption in the future, and how they, as
jurisdictions were going to move the community towards the comprehensive energy plan goals. The comprehensive energy plan is a state plan, which calls for a number of pretty ambitious goals. So by 2050, that would be, using 90% of the energy that we consume would be renewable, and other similar goals. So as part of that process, regional planning commissions have received funding and support to both rewrite the energy chapter of their regional plans and to work with towns rewriting the energy section of their town plans, up to and including if you meet certain standards that are prescribed by the Public Service Department, or now PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, which is replaced the Public Service Board, that you could be shown substantial deference in an Act 248 hearing. An Act 248 hearing is a certificate for public good for a large-scale renewable energy facility. In general, we as staff have been recommending to you, the Planning Commission, and to the Select Board that there's little benefit for us in going through the extra complexities to achieve substantial deference before the PUC, before the Planning Utilities Commission, because A, we're not likely to experience large-scale renewable energy projects of that kind, and B, even if we were, we live in a community where there's widespread general support for renewable energy, and when we've had hearings and pursued this question previously, in particular the project on Putney Road, or just on the back of Putney Road that you can see from 91, drew only complimentary support from the broader community, didn't actually attract any significant negative reaction. So we had this sort of best of both worlds moment where we're not very hilly, we're not likely to get large-scale turbine facilities, and whatever we're likely to get in terms of other renewable energy projects that would be large, including solar, we seem to have generally widespread and enthusiastic support amongst the community. So the Regional Planning Commission has generated a series of maps, which I'm proposing that we should just include in the energy section or the energy chapter of the town plan. And what this looks at is the scope for, or the constraints on energy generation, assuming wind and solar access, so steep slopes and trees. And then known constraints, and then again using slope analysis, what the potential for solar energy potential is. And then you get solar as a resource, which is the yellow bits. Just,
Solar as a resource.
Like where it's good to put it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Where
it
if you
works,
put
yeah.
it, you'll get stable generation.
Yeah.
Have you guys examined these maps for
Did not very
veracity?
They're not very effective. They're just done at a scale that's meaningless, but that's okay. I mean, someone had to do it. So, and then wind energy potential, where we actually turn up with a couple of potential areas. And then lastly, expressing wind as a resource. So what I'm suggesting is that we include these maps in the plan and as a resource, and then as briefly as possible discuss them as the kind of information that would be utilized
Okay, so
to achieve the comprehensive energy plan goals.
let's say, for the sake of argument, that these get adopted into our master plan, and that somebody identifies a site, and ultimately, we don't like it. We've given them another quill in their quiver to have it supported on a statewide level, and made it harder for us to not locate it in location.
What I'd say there is that by virtue of it turning up in one of these shaded areas as a potential site, it's already gained the
Whatever
the blessed, the status from the Public Utilities Commission that it would need. And we would need to be making some kind of counter argument that's even more specific, that there's some cultural or natural phenomenon that is
Associated with
present
that site.
that precludes it from being developed. And we don't have that detailed information, and it's kind of a fool's errand because you're only ever going to find that out once somebody proposes something. So let's just have it on and see which way it goes. And I don't know, I'm betting on
Nothing happening.
I'm betting on that.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
and this
Well, you know.
is showing potential too.
Yeah,
It doesn't take into the account
Yeah.
of a developer
Right.
actually, like,
For
you know,
instance,
whether or not
yeah.
it's worth their time.
Yeah,
to-
so I would say, and have a statement
Wing stuff.
on the map saying, these don't show parcel boundaries. And so this is not implying anything, this is just indicative. These are indicative maps, they are not regulatory maps. And that's the end of it. I mean, you know, if they want to work at this scale, that's fine to work at this scale. I mean,
The
I would
state
just,
of Vermont has just paid the Wyndham Regional Commission a lot of money to create these maps that
yes,
say,
yeah.
okay.
So how does this fit in with the green economy hub and the fact that there are thousands of jobs now in green energy, green economy sector, and how does that?
I
fit
think
in
that's an
this
economic
picture?
development discussion, and that does get discussed in the economic development chapter already. And so, I think that the energy chapter, as it currently exists, also identifies renewable energy, the renewable energy sector as a growth sector of the economy. So I don't think that changes anything, insofar as the language that we've already got. There is a template from, again, the Regional Planning Commission that's been formulated with the help of the Public Service Department, which speaks to questions of shifting from a fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable energy-based economy and so forth, and doesn't actually use any numbers to describe, for instance, how many people's jobs are currently now connected to the fossil fuel industry, and how many people's jobs are connected to the renewable energy industry, and how you might imagine in the future that switch happening or whatever. That's because they don't have them.
Green economy puts a roof over my head.
That's important.
Yeah.
But
I was looking at
it's more the fossil fuel part that, you know, it's so diverse and so difficult to capture that actually, you know, the aspect of job replacement or whatever is difficult to quantify. And then the other part about it is that we don't get into, but I'm glad that you brought this up, is there's a whole bunch of stuff around what the municipality could and should be doing to encourage the community to shift from fossil fuel-based energy sources to renewable energy sources. We, apart from coercion and encouragement, we don't have a lot of other tools at our disposal. So we don't set the prices for things like gasoline or fuel oil or propane. We can't interfere in those things. They're all federally regulated. They're not even regulated by the state very directly. And so, you know, like the state can set a tax on gasoline, but that's for the whole state. We can't even set one for Wyndham County or Brattleboro. You know, we can't add on. We don't have the authority to do that. So we have limited tools at our disposal to really shift people's behaviors and attitudes. And I think it's important to have a broad discussion about how much we want to move people from fossil fuel to renewable energy and think about conservation and think about efficiency. And the town as an economic unit has a responsibility there. The town is once the solar array goes up on the solid waste district on the old landfill, the town will be through net metering purchasing 72.5% of all the energy, all the electricity that we use from that facility. So we'll be 72.5% renewable in our own consumption, which is not insignificant. And so I guess you could interpret that as sort of throwing out the challenge to other large institutions like the school system and the hospital and the retreat and a variety of other large corporations, and seeing whether they're going to move in a similar direction. In small ways, we do things like implement the state's requirement for, say, EV vehicle charging stations and parking lots. That's moving along actually fairly briskly. They seem to be relatively well utilized. So where we can make a change, we have been making changes. There are areas where we could make maybe more progress, but it's difficult for financial reasons. But which everybody else experiences as well. But ultimately, in the end, whether you have fuel oil in your basement or solar panels on your roof is kind of your call. It's hard for us to get in there and make you change from one to the other. And I think that's the challenge in terms of writing a chapter like this. And I think that's the challenge with a comprehensive energy plan at the state level. So
I think, sort of off of what Kathy was saying about providing these maps, it seems like a wonderful tool for the numerous people involved in the green economy and renewable energies in our region to be able to use these and promote.
it kind of not at a scale, to be honest,
They're just
they're
not
really
usable.
not at a scale that makes them very useful. I mean, because it's just not
It
that.
would be an indicator, and then
Yeah,
they would have
at
to
best
go
it's
out
an
and-
indicator. I mean, if you,
anybody that wanted to do a wind.
is going to have to do way more than this.
I mean, I think it's funny because
Yeah.
that makes it look like,
Oh, yeah.
there's potential here, but like,
Right.
they'd have to invest so much money to actually.
I'm not sure I understand what we're trying to decide
Yeah.
between,
Okay.
because
So-
if we're including them
Yeah.
in our plan, we're including them in our plan or not, but they're still probably available no
Yeah.
matter what, so, I don't know, I mean, what's,
Yeah, I
what are
think
we trying
what
to
Rod was
decide?
saying is, because they've been made, they exist,
exist,
and they
yeah.
have
They have a value.
a merit.
Yeah. And the scale, I mean, so these are for the entire town. And so if you were to look at I mean, I'm sure they'll be accessible from the Wyndham Regional Commission website. But if you were to look at the Wyndham Regional Plan, they won't generate town scale maps. They'll generate a region-wide, county-wide
Okay.
map, right? So to some extent, in very broad indicative terms, they still have some value.
I see.
Yeah, but not as a document that's going to inform an investment of time or resources. Okay, so if you were going to think seriously about putting a wind turbine up on South Street,
You'd probably do your own.
you're going to have to do much more rigorous analysis than this.
But,
right?
it's not that different from saying, we have a map of marketing areas open for development, and no developer who's gonna, redo the Home Depot would do it without their own marketing stuff.
Exactly.
So it's just a kind of a thumbnail sketch.
It's just it's a very simple tool, and if it encourages discussion or people's reassessment of the landscape from the standpoint of renewable energy, then I think it's had a positive effect,
Yeah.
But I don't think, I think you'd be really unwise to make a large-scale investment on the basis of these maps. And I don't think Wyndham Regional Commission or the state would claim that, you should. So it's just, they're advisory, they're indicative. And we don't have these kinds of maps, we don't have anything that resembles them in
No.
the current.
In the current
Plan.
energy plan, I mean, we do talk about a little bit about renewable, but we don't get into any renewable siting.
Okay, so we're gonna
Yeah.
put these in the
The
new
energy
plan
chapter.
and the energy chapter. Great.
We could, right, so I mean, it was more just to get your reaction to it.
I think that's great.
And then.
Let's do it.
Good, okay, is that a motion?
Yes, I move that we add these maps to the energy chapter.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
And then I think that the other part is, there's been a lot of discussion at the select board level and in general, just, people very distressed and upset that the Paris Accord, that the US backed out of the Paris Accord. So there's been a large scale movement at the state and city level in particular across the US. In other words, smaller jurisdiction than the federal government, where people have been trying to recommit to attaining the Paris Accord levels, right? It turns out that the comprehensive energy plan in Vermont, for the most part, is tougher, or the goals are higher than the Paris Accord, which is fine. And so, in general, I'm proposing that we draft this chapter for obvious reasons to do with complying with the state's requirements in this regard, and we stick with the comprehensive energy plan goals. That just leaves the question of exactly how we would do that when over 75% of the energy that we use is in transportation, and transportation is one of the key things that a municipality has no obvious direct oversight of.
I think you're gonna have to write the report saying that
Right.
and separating out transportation from the rest of energy, because I think it's really foolish of the state to make those categories for municipalities when they have no control.
Right.
And moreover, if tourism is a key economic
Yep.
goal, tourists drive here. And we want them to come.
in canoes. Yeah.
And then we want them to come, we want more of them, they want them to drive up and down. I mean, it's just
And stop in every town.
and stop in every town.
So smaller gas tanks or bigger? I can't quite figure out what you're saying.
More charging stations, I suppose,
Okay. More bathrooms as well.
always.
It's a huge environmental impact right there. Now I'm thinking about it. Okay.
Well, if everyone comes, tourists come and revamp the economy, we'll all be flush.
Oh, you're really on tonight. That's just excellent. All right. Yeah. Okay.
Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I will make a motion to adjourn.
So I was thinking it.
All in favor?
Aye, yes.
Okay. It's unbelievable I recorded this soon.
You did.
I don't know.
I made it.